Oh, Elden Ring. It's finally here, ladies and gentlemen. It's been one of my most anticipated games this year, unsurprisingly. I actually became a fan of Soulsborne games fairly recently. The first Souls game that I beat was actually Sekiro back in August of 2020, and it became one of my favorite games of all time, and that's what inspired me to go back and just kind of play through every single Souls game and their DLC. And Bloodborne I actually beat just last month, and big shout out to Lance McDonald for that 60 FPS patch and mod. But yeah, suffice to say that the Soulsborne genre was really fresh on my mind going into Elden Ring, and I'm happy to say that if you're a Soulsborne fan like me or are a curious newcomer willing to tolerate the unforgiving nature of the genre, the short answer is 100% yes. Please, get this game. It's freaking awesome. Or rather, I should say the answer so far, because I still haven't actually rolled credits on this game. I would be by now if it were any other Souls game, but Elden Ring, let me tell you, it's a whole different beast. You guys, this game is freaking huge, not just in its volume, but in its density of content. And if there ever was a game that I wasn't gonna rush, it was this one. Going into this review, I knew there was a high risk that I wouldn't be able to finish the game by embargo, but I still wasn't expecting to be this far behind in the main story in relation to how much time I put in. I've played close to 55 hours of this game as of the publishing of this review, and I still feel like I'm nowhere close to finishing it. At the pace that I'm going, I feel like I could possibly spend another 50 hours before finishing the campaign proper. Honestly, there's no way for me to tell you for sure. Miyazaki said in a recent interview that beelining the main story would take about 30 hours, and that figure's probably true if you ignore literally everything there's to discover in this massive world. In my humble opinion, that is no way to play Elden Ring. If it only takes you 30 hours to beat this game, I genuinely feel like it would be doing this game a disservice, as there'd be so much cool side content you'd be missing out on. Now, I don't have to tell you that mechanically this is, for the most part, a quintessential Soulsborne game. Combat will be very familiar for those who've played FromSoft's past titles, closest to Dark Souls 3, I'd say, in the case of Elden Ring. Like before, it's a simple-to-learn but hard-to-master system involving basic, light, and heavy attack movesets alongside defensive capabilities like blocking, parrying, and invincibility frame dodging, all paired with a limited number of preset heals you only recover at rest points at bonfires, or as they're known in this game, Sites of Grace. The name of the game is Trial and Error, learning through defeat and improving through repetition and perseverance. Much like other Soulsborne titles, Elden Ring is not for the impatient or the faint of heart. It is a tough game. Plenty of areas and bosses will kick your ass to oblivion. You will sigh in frustration. You may scream in anger, but when victory comes, it tastes all the sweeter. And that taste of hard-earned victory remains at the heart of what will keep people coming back to FromSoft games. Elden Ring is no different on that front. Elden Ring does come with its own set of additions and enhancements, though, despite its familiar elements, either entirely new or adapted from past entry systems and mechanics. There's a new block counter you can execute by doing a heavy attack directly after blocking. Combat arts from Dark Souls 3 are expanded upon and are swappable in the form of equipable Ashes of War, ranging from special weapon moves to weapon-based spells that just adds an extra layer of customizability. There are a wide variety of summoning spirits who can aid you in battle and even be upgraded. The stealth system adapted from Sekiro allows you to tactically skip risky encounters entirely, or more easily go in for a backstab and tactically take down enemy camps. The jump button allows for far easier execution of aerial attacks. And then there is mounted combat, which takes a bit of getting used to, but is tremendously helpful when tackling open world enemies and bosses. The facelift that magic and spells have received in Elden Ring is also worth mentioning. While my character build didn't focus on magic, I went for a dagger-focused dex build with minor magic on the side. What I can tell you is that I've obtained quite a few of them from enemies and bosses who use them, and their effects are way cooler than anything we've seen in other Soulsborne titles. Now, combat overall being so reminiscent of past games does mean it does inherit some of its less ideal elements, namely the occasional finicky lock-on and camera, though in the camera department, I will say, they did noticeably improve it by making it so that it no longer collides with and gets pushed around by every environmental object, but rather fades those environmental objects and reduces their opacity, so that just helped so much. I did notice the camera jerked around a lot less as a result. Elden Ring's character progression will also be familiar to veterans of the genre. Starting out, you can choose from a wide variety of classes, or start out as a blank slate via the Wretch class, which is what I did as a purist, though nothing wrong with going with other classes which see you start at higher level, higher stats distributed in ways that make sense for each respective class, and with thematically appropriate starting weapons and or spells. In the long term, these classes really don't matter as much. You'll have plenty of flexibility to build your character as you go, and respecking options offered by the game means you can always change your mind about your build. During character creation, you can also, of course, cosmetically customize your avatar with options to shape and mold just about every facial feature you can imagine, and there are also sliders for bodily proportions as well. Gotta say, character models look so much better in Elden Ring than past FromSoft titles. It's just refreshing. Anyway, from there on, progression happens by killing enemies, which will grant this game's version of Souls called runes, the resource you spend to increase your attributes, with rune quantity requirements increasing as well each time you level up, forcing you to grind out tougher enemies to level up more expediently. Now, the secret sauce of Soulsborne Ring games is that if you die, you will drop all of your souls before being taken to your last checkpoint or site of grace, and then from there you're given a second chance to return to that location and retrieve your runes, but if you die a second time before picking them up, they're gone forever. This is what makes death and survival meaningful in this genre, what creates that sense of risk and reward, a sense of high stakes to enemy encounters or traversing trap-filled environments, especially when even the most minor of enemies can straight up kill you, even at high levels if you're not careful. Your character progression is always on the line. It's all about gauging whether it's worth trekking on further and risking losing what are essentially experience points you've collected, as the better you do, the more runes you are risking, or if it's time to retreat and spend them at the expense of enemies respawning, everything resetting, and having to go through that leg of the journey again. Now, one area where Elden Ring is more forgiving is that at almost any given time, you can choose to fast travel to a previously discovered site of grace, with the only exception being when you're inside deeper delving mini-dungeons. In past Soulsborne games, you could only fast travel at bonfires or retreat to them by using certain consumable items, but in Elden Ring, as long as there aren't any aggroed enemies around, you can bring up the game's map and fast travel wherever you choose for free, allowing for safe retreats. I didn't feel like this diminished the risk-reward factor much, though, if you're concerned about that, as you are still required to rest at sites of grace and reset an area before you can access the level-up menu, but it does make it easier to grind runes, which, I don't know, I didn't mind at all. And it makes sense why this fast travel system was included. It was necessitated by what is perhaps Elden Ring's most substantial differentiator from past Soulsborne titles, its expansive open world. Whereas past games dealt in large-scale areas woven together by intricately interconnected level design, Elden Ring connects all of its large areas, dungeons, discoveries, and activities through vast fields and landscapes. And in turn, sites of grace, which again are also fast travel points, are abundant throughout the land as to not make navigating the open world a chore, which is a huge plus. Introduced in Elden Ring is also a new form of checkpoint called Stakes of Marika, placed near key points of interest so players can choose to return to these instead of more distant sites of grace, making things like optional boss runs a lot shorter. They basically save you from having to trek all the way back and keeps the open world navigation from feeling like too much of a chore. Though if you want to have access to features like leveling up, redistributing Estus-like flasks charges for heals for HP and MP, or FP as are known here, upgrading the flasks to have more charges or be more potent, customizing your spell loadout, among other features, you will have to return to a site of grace, which does encourage some preparation for the trials ahead. And boy, are there plenty of trials to find around the open world. It is just littered with things to do. Much like in, say, Breath of the Wild, an interesting structure in the distance might pique your interest, and more often than not, it does tend to lead to an interesting locale that will see you rewarded for your curiosity, be it through valuable new items like golden seeds or sacred tears used to upgrade healing flasks, valuable crafting materials for weapon upgrades, or for the game's new menu-based consumables crafting system, new emotes to express yourself with, all manners of new armor, weapons, talismans, and useful consumables, Open-world bosses roaming out and about with rewards of their own to give, mobs of enemies fighting each other or guarding and transporting giant carts housing treasures, access to mini-dungeons or large-scale optional dungeons, smaller castles, forts, and/or enemy camps to infiltrate and fight your way through for rewards that await, magical structures that will have you solving puzzles, platforming segments that will test your precision with the game's jump button, a painting showing you the location of valuable loot, peculiar NPCs with valuable services to offer, or with stories and anecdotes to share who may task you with a vague side quest, just to name a few. The list just goes on and on with plenty of surprises. You have to discover things on your own. There's no hand-holding, and all of this content is compelling in some way, be it because the rewards are worthwhile or because the activity itself is engaging. Hell, the open world as a whole can feel like its own giant puzzle. You won't always be able to beeline your way towards your next destination. Tall cliff sides and obstructing obstacles will often force you to look at the topography of the world and study the environment to find the best route to make your way up a cliff or make your way down one without dying, preventing exploration from feeling mindless and actually making it fairly engaging. Exploration is also influenced by the game's day and night cycle and weather systems, which affects things like what enemies are roaming the open world, what they're doing at certain times of day, guards may be sleeping at night, and how much visibility both you and your enemies have. The map is definitely not a traditional feature of Soulsborne games, but in this case definitely a necessity, and it is what's most helpful when it comes to finding things to do. The map does initially start out small and blank, but as you clear the game's fog of war by moving into new areas and collect easily findable map fragments scattered throughout the world, the map will present more detailed views that may reveal topographical routes that you may not have noticed before, or curious-looking landmarks worth marking on your map and then investigating. And when you're not distracted by the dozens upon dozens of hours worth of optional content, you'll likely be following the guidance of main quest-driven sites of grace that emanate these streaks of gold, indicating the general direction of the critical path, which will take you to Elden Ring's main dungeons whose scale, intricacy, and design at least match and at times surpass main areas seen in past Soulsborne entries. It is worth noting, however, that the critical path isn't strictly linear and can branch out. As an example, I might have sort of accidentally skipped the second major area you're recommended to go. There was this obvious clue about how to enter the locked gates that I accidentally forgot about because I got distracted by other stuff and ended up going to areas where I was underleveled with woefully under-upgraded weapons. Thankfully, I had played Souls games recently enough that my skills were pretty sharp and I was still able to tackle those areas. They were still feasible, but I probably made my life a little more difficult, but you know what? Zero regrets. This would explain why one of the main quest bosses could one-shot me with almost all of their attacks, and it took me like 4 hours to beat them. It was 4 hours of what felt initially like beating my head against the wall before I basically started seeing the Matrix with this boss in the victory run, and yeah, I celebrated with extreme jubilation and felt pretty godlike in that singular moment. There's nothing like the feeling of getting so good at something that seemed impossible at first becomes just a cakewalk and you just do it to perfection in the final run. It was when I saw just how many runes I got from that battle that I immediately knew, oh, I am definitely not supposed to be here at this stage, but the fact that I managed to accomplish this so underleveled made the victory feel all the more triumphant, which is why I appreciated that the game allows you to go off the beaten path and play your way. It makes for more interesting stories and memories from player to player, not to mention the ability to take a break from a hard boss and just go find something else to do, be it exploring areas of the map you haven't set foot on, visiting those landmarks that might have drawn your curiosity but you save for later, fighting other bosses from before who you haven't beaten yet and want to revisit, you name it. Mind you, it's not quite Breath of the Wild levels of you can go fight the final boss right now if you want kind of thing. Some things are blocked off until you fulfill certain tasks, but there is a good amount of non-linearity here that I think Soulsborne fans will absolutely appreciate. And speaking of bosses, while I've obviously not seen every single boss in the game yet, I can already tell you that I think Elden Ring has some of the coolest bosses in all of Soulsborne. The creativity of FromSoft's enemy design, be it grotesque creatures, cursed entities, or majestic beings, remains unparalleled and continues to be highlights in Elden Ring as they were in past Soulsborne games, both visually and mechanically. Aside from how imposing they can look, their attacks tend to be merciless and relentless and just really cool in a way that you like both hate them and love them, but it's what makes learning dodge timings to the point where it becomes instinct feel so freaking empowering. I'm also impressed by the sheer quantity of bosses found in Elden Ring, many of them optional. I did notice a few optional bosses do repeat here and there, but they're never exactly the same, with just enough variants or enhancements to their familiar moveset to keep you on your guard, kind of like the difference between fighting Rathalos and Azure Rathalos in Monster Hunter. I will not be spoiling any of the major boss battles past Margit the Fell Omen from the network test in this video, but if you're like me and boss battles are what you look forward to the most with FromSoft games, I don't think you'll be disappointed in the least bit. And Elden Ring in particular takes advantage of its larger scope enabled by the engine adjustments as well as the addition of horseback combat for certain boss battles, with one major one being among the grandest boss battle set pieces in Soulsborne history, and it's quite the sight to behold. I won't say much more than that. Speaking of sights to behold, my god, this game is gorgeous and proof that art style, art direction, and art talent trumps graphical fidelity every single time. This is a last-gen game, one that pushes FromSoft's admittedly more dated-feeling engine to its max, and you can definitely tell it's a refined version of the same engine used for Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, etc. From a pure technical standpoint, Demon's Souls Remake is objectively the better-looking game, but the scope and magnificence of Elden Ring's visuals are on another level, and artistically, the splendor of various biomes, landscapes, land masses, and large-scale areas, the spectacle of architectures, both big and small, the flora and fauna, the distant glowing Erd trees blooming gold, how unusually colorful this game can be at times by FromSoft standards, it's all just masterfully and exquisitely executed. Trust me when I say I haven't shown you jack in this video, and I refuse to show you more, as I want you to discover the beauty of this game yourself. But for Soulsborne traditionalists, fear not, for even if this is a brighter FromSoft game compared to past entries, it is still contrasted by a sense of dread and desolation, by all of the visual elements that show the detritus of a ravaged land. You can just feel the world's history through its visual design and language. Everything you see in Elden Ring feels like it's telling a story. Now, unlike many other games, FromSoft's approach to storytelling has always been less direct than your average game, and Elden Ring isn't all that different there. Characters will hint at past events, information will be offered about your present goals, in this case to find the shattered pieces of the Elden Ring and ascend from Tarnished to Eldenlord, and basic explanations about the setting and history are provided, but it is up to you to dig deeper into, say, item descriptions that offer additional backstory and lore hints, to decipher the implications of vaguely doled out dialogue, and to interpret the meaning of nebulous narrative elements. It's up to you to sort of connect the dots. Now, I can't fully comment on the story since, again, I haven't finished the game, but its lore so far has been fascinating to see unravel. You can definitely get hints of that George R. Martin flavor, but this does still feel like a FromSoft story at its core. The presentation is still very much FromSoft in its identity. And speaking of presentation, a few cutscenes will play from time to time during key narrative beats, important set-piece moments, or to introduce some of the more epic bosses and delve a bit into their backstory. And I would definitely say the story and lore so far isn't anywhere near as vague as, say, Bloodborne, but still you have to work for it. To me, this has always been a fascinating form of storytelling, and I'm glad to see much of that tradition carry on into Elden Ring. It makes the story feel as much an active experience as the gameplay. I also have to give a special shout out to the music of this game. FromSoft is no stranger to some of the most epic, beautiful, melancholic, somber, and/or harrowing music in all of gaming, or hell, any medium for that matter, and fans expecting no different from Elden Ring will absolutely not be disappointed. Now, one major aspect of the game that I didn't get to experiment too much with was online features. The messaging system does make a return, and I did take advantage of that, with plenty of useful clues and warnings saving my hind on more than one occasion, but as far as the PvP invasion system and co-op goes, I was just too focused on my preferred single-player experience. The game does give you all of the multiplayer items to be a host or to transport yourself to other player sessions fairly early on, and multiplayer password options will easily allow you to join forces with friends up to 4 players. Just keep in mind that this isn't a GTA Online type of drop-in experience where you just get to do whatever in the open world. Co-op does impose limitations like disabling fast travel and horseback riding, and its main purpose is to call upon someone to help defeat an area's boss or mini-boss, after which the co-op session will end. You're not going to be seamlessly tackling the whole campaign in co-op or anything like that. Players will have to be resummoned at different stages and areas of the game. There's a whole website dedicated to explaining this whole system for those interested. With all that said, the cherry on top of this massive, delicious cake is that this is, for the most part, a very polished game. I say for the most part because there's one key and important area where the game does fumble and stumble: frame rate stutter. In my close to 55 hours with this game, I did feel like I experienced this a bit too frequently, even though I was playing on a pretty powerful PC, housing an RTX 3080, and I remember experiencing a similar frequency of microstutters when I played the game on PS5 during the network test, so I don't feel like this is a problem on my end. It does seem like a potential optimization problem. Now, most of these microstutters were tolerable and forgivable enough, but there were a few instances where the game would sort of buffer and then speed up to play catch-up, kind of like when there's a bad connection on a video call and a user will be frozen for a second or two and then the audio will play and fast forward to catch up. Let me show you what that looks like and how it has gotten me killed. There's like one or two more examples I could show you, but that'd be delving into spoiler territory, so I won't, but you get the idea. While these weren't a constant occurrence, it happened enough times during inopportune moments that it did lead to some frustrating moments. It is worth noting that there is a Day 1 patch coming for Elden Ring, and outlets like Digital Foundry were asked to reserve their performance reviews until that patch was out, as it would be more representative of the final product, a fair ask. So maybe many of these issues will be fixed by the time players get their hands on the game, fingers crossed. The game also did crash on me on 2 occasions, hopefully that will be ironed out as well. But yeah, these were the only noteworthy technical issues, and they were far from a deal breaker. They didn't change the fact that this is one of those games where I very easily lost track of time. One of those games I had a very hard time putting down, and that completely messed up my sleep schedule, and I still have plenty more to go back to. And that's just only for my first playthrough with the one build I've experimented with. There's so many builds you can make in this game. I can't wait to try out all of the weapons and spells that are inaccessible to me in this build for my next playthrough. So yeah, I don't know if it's obvious by now, but I freaking love this game so far. It is just such an incredibly well-executed evolution of the Soulsborne formula, both through its more nuanced enhancements and in how the seamless open-world sandbox adds to the experience with an additional layer of wonder, discovery, and freedom. If you're not intimidated by punishment, by punishing gameplay, if you're determined to rise above this punishment, I think you'll absolutely love this game. I don't feel like I have to roll credits to tell you that. So far, this is one of my favorite games in this still young year for gaming. At the very least, I feel like I can easily say this is an easy Game of the Year nominee for 2022. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my impression/review in progress for Elden Ring. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this game. Are you excited to check this out? If you're a newcomer, do you want to look into this one? Maybe this is going to be your entry point. Share your thoughts about your anticipation for this game in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.